So we're cloud recording now, and I'm going to record it one other place, just to be sure. Okay. Thanks for your patience. I think we're working some of the logistical, technological nightmares out, and we're getting there. You can hear us. Can Eddie, you guys say something, see if they can hear you.
I hope that they can hear me. Can they?
You asking me?
Today?
You asking me?
Well, I hope that if you can hear me, I hope that they can hear me. Can they?
Well,
Why not?
I have no response yet, so I don't know.
Yes, we
I can hear you fine.
There we
Okay,
go.
great.
So I'm going to let Doug in. He's trying to get in. So let's get started. Doug is coming in, and so as mentioned before, we want to build this into three parts. The first part is start looking at exegetical principles. I want to dive a little deeper tonight into word studies, and you'll see in the handouts I sent you several. We'll probably have a few, most weeks, maybe not every week. But I want to go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint if I can. Oh, I need to fix this so it doesn't shut off. Hold on one second. Logistics of technology is complicated, requires much forethought, which is not my forte. Let's see, set this to where it does not shut off. Display brightness. Auto lock, there we go. Never. Okay, run my battery down, that's what I want to do. Let's go back to my remote control for the, there we go. Let's see, I think I want screen number 2. And I did. Okay, so hopefully you can see screen number 2, which is the PowerPoint slides. Is that the case? Well, I know we can't hear. I think online it must be the case because I see no heads nodding and no one saying no. So, I'm going to advance the slide and the remote is in here. I should have known. There we go. All right, so I want to start with a little definition of exegesis that I pulled out of the New Testament Greek and Ministry by David Allen Black. Great little book. I recommended it. We're going to use a lot from it, and we're going to look at. He has some approaches to word study. There's a couple of others. So what we'll do is tonight we'll go into the first few pieces of it. Next week, we'll look at a few more pieces. Next week, a few more pieces until we exhaust what he has laid out. And then we'll look at someone else's approach to a word study and exegesis as we go through it. So, in his book, he suggests that there are 3 overarching questions that we need to ask. One is, do I know where the biblical text fits? So the text that I'm examining, do I know where it fits within the whole, as well as within the immediate context. And we'll break this tonight. We'll spend some time looking at what he means in this regard. The point being is that we don't begin with the question, what does the text mean, but what did it mean? Too often, people ask the question, what does this mean to me? What is this text saying to me? And that's the wrong question. When we start down that path, we've already biased our exegesis. You've already inserted some 21st century perspectives into first century writings. And so the question that needs to be asked is, what did the text mean to the original audience? What was the original author trying to say to them? Secondarily, we would ask, how does it apply to me? But that comes later. The issue of drawing out textual meaning is first very complicated by language translation first. I mean, we don't have the original autographs, that is the original, that paper, that papyrus, or that Paul or Peter or James or Jude pinned on. We have copy after copy after copy after copy. We have a great degree of confidence that they come extremely close to 99-point-some-odd% of what the original said because of the volumes of copies that we have. And we can contrast and compare and make a pretty well-informed decision that we've got pretty close to what the original was. But that puts us about 2 steps removed in terms of drawing out the original, because number one, not only do we have copies that we're really pulling from, and so we have to examine any textual issues that might be associated with our passage, if any. Not every passage does. 95% of textual issues are associated with grammatical changes that do not affect theology whatsoever. So people talk about the volume of different changes that are made in these copies. The vast majority are grammatical changes that have no effect whatsoever on theology. There are a few places that have some effect on theology, but it's pretty clear, most of these places are pretty clear what the original is by examining both the evidence internally and externally. There's only a few, very few, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 places that have a question that we have to determine. That probably won't be that's not our intent of this class. So the question, though, secondarily, is do I trust the translators and the words that they've used to reflect the author's intent? Words have meaning today. They have meaning in the first century, or English. What English? Ain't English. Was not English in the first century. It was the Greek or Aramaic or whatever we're examining. In our case, it would be the New Testament Greek, or further back into the Hebrew. They have meaning today that a translator chose, and that meaning may have changed since they originally chose it, and may vary depending upon who you're talking to and their origin and their locale and how they use words and such. So we're already 2 steps removed from that in terms of doing an exegete. We need to examine the text within its original language. That at least eliminates the translation. Now, I like to look at various translations. Who doesn't? It's a lot easier to get an idea of how people translate. And we're going to look at that tonight again. But if I'm just examining what other people did, I'm not getting back to the original. I'm depending upon their analysis. And as we mentioned before, everyone brings some biases to the table. I'm no exception, nor are you. We bring some bias to the table. And so we want to minimize or eliminate or mitigate that bias as much as possible. One way to do that is move towards the original text. It doesn't completely eliminate it, but it certainly helps to move that direction. To examine the text in its original language eliminates that intermediate step. And we want to ask the question, where does the text fit biblically? That is getting a bird's eye view of the whole text. The question is, am I really certain about what the text is saying to the original audience? This is really sort of standing within the text and putting yourself in place of the audience. We're going to talk a little more about this, but it's good to understand the background of the audience that's being written to. It's good to put their shoes on your feet and to hear from their perspective what's going on in their life. And then the other question is that could anyone benefit today from what I have to say or what I learned about the text? That is looking beyond the text towards contemporary applications. The question is, it's not good enough to understand Scripture for its own sake. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge is really of no value, but it is necessary to make application in my own life and to make application to those whose truth I'm preaching to, the truths that I'm preaching to. In 1 Corinthians 8, verse 1, second half of it says, knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. Having knowledge puffs people up, but applying it in my own life and applying it in my proclamation to those that I'm teaching and speaking, that is a form of love, to teach the truth in love. Thus, in exegete, we're always examining the context, the meaning, and significance. Those are the 3 areas. Do I know where my text fits biblically? Am I really certain about what the text said to the original audience in terms of its textual, lexical, syntactical, structural, rhetorical, traditional, critical, and could it benefit today from what I have to say or learned about the text? Could I benefit in terms of theology that present to others and proclaim to others. Context concerns both. It's not going to spend our time looking at do I know where my text fits biblically. Context concerns both the historical and literary aspect of the text. Historical context concerns itself with the religious, political, and cultural situation of the author and the audience. Just some time studying about what it was like to live as a first century person or a first century Christian brings a lot of perspective that we don't typically have. And to understand how they live daily, how they dress, when it says, and Jesus says, they girded up their loins. Well, what do you mean they girded up their loins? Well, by looking at how they dressed and what they did in those days will give you a better understanding of the application in that day than how you apply that in ours today. Literary context deals with the immediate context of the text and its overall genre. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The meaning, that is, am I really certain about what the text is saying to the original audience? The meaning deals with 6 kinds of questions. Textual. What were the original words? Are there questions about the original words? 1 John 5, verse 7. I think it's verse 7 and 8, where it's, you can study it and look at it. When Erasmus was moving from the Latin to the Greek New Testament and writing it, he did not include what's in 1 John 5, verse 7, because there were no manuscripts that referenced it. And that is the three, the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Spirit, in contrast to the blood, the water, and... Do you remember what it is?
Blood, the water, and the word, I think.
Blood, water, and the word? No, 1 John 5, should be 8. I should have looked at this before I started down this path. No, doing something else.
It says, and there are 3 that bear witness in earth, the spirit and the water and the blood, and these 3 agree in one. So what you meant?
Yeah, and the spirit, the water, and the blood was not a question about original, but to back up from there, it speaks to verse 6. This is the one who came by water and blood, Jesus Christ, not with water only, but with the water and the blood. And here in verse 6 and 7, it is the Spirit who testifies, because the Spirit is truth, for there are 3 that testify. Oh, my passage doesn't have it. So,
New King James says,
that's,
verse 6 and 7.
I can't remember, guys.
This is he who came, verse 6, this is he who came by water and blood, Jesus Christ, not only by water, but by water and blood. And it is the Spirit who bears witness, because the Spirit is truth. For there are 3 that bear witness in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these 3 are one.
Yeah, I went down a path I didn't prepare myself for, so don't have to look at it. But my point being is that there are some areas that are obvious questions with regard to the originality of it. It doesn't change the truth of the text, because what is possibly inserted in this text, not by the original author, but by later, is still true elsewhere. That is clearly an insertion by or from the original inspired authors. So I went down a path I apologize for. That's what happens when you get me. 6 kinds of questions: textual, that is the original words; lexical, meaning the meaning of words; semantics, a range of meanings in words; syntactical, that is the relationship of words with one another. Words don't function by themselves; they function within a context of other words, and so it's the relationship of words that brings overall significance to the meaning. Structural, the overall arrangement of the text, and we'll look at that in the next week or two. Rhetorical, the relationship of the form to the meaning, as well as tradition critical, that is traditions that are behind the text. We'll look at that in more significance later. There is also, could anyone benefit today from what I have to say about the text? Their significance involves theology, what we hear, what we proclaim, what we preach. Thus, the exegete needs an accurate knowledge of the biblical settings of the text, an understanding of the text itself, and sufficient and accurate knowledge of the text to make meaningful application. Preaching shares these 3 dimensions. Consider if you're standing before the pulpit, or you're standing on the street corner, or you're preaching to your neighbor in your home, that there's the historical dimension of the text that connects today's audience with the original audience. Get them connected, that grammatically and syntactically dimension of the text that helps people understand the meaning behind the text of the original author. And the personal dimension, which enables people to accurately and to appropriately apply the text in our own lives. Let's see. I got to remember what technological tool I'm using. There we go. Multi-talented, just like any monkey. So. All right, so discovering the text. We find the view from above, and that is where do we find our text? Dive a little deeper in this portion of David Allen Black's perspective on word studies. And so he talks about historical analysis. That is looking at the authorship, things that we're generally aware of, the audience, the date, the occasion, the purpose, the culture, the sociological influences, and other related background material. It's not about producing, listen, I know I'm not one who loves studying, the date of the text, or who loves studying, prove that this is Peter writing this, or Jude, or whomever the case may be. I mean, those are important studies and needs, but I don't consider them fun. And some people do. It's historical analysis. But one must be careful. It's important to study it and we'll look at it, but it's not about producing sleep-induced sermons. You've heard people get into the sermons, kind of like I do, start talking about stuff and you just, you bring background material that doesn't necessarily help enhance the message that you want to produce. So we don't want to produce sleep-induced sermons, but an understanding of the historical situation facing the writer, facing the audience. It gives sensitivity to the message that's delivered. And that's the goal and purpose, is to understand, put yourself in their shoes. And when you're preaching, help your audience to understand what it was like to live in their shoes, in their time, dealing with the issues that they dealt with. The purpose actually of the class on Tuesday nights, which many of you are taking, Introduction to the New Testament, is to provide that necessary background for the New Testament books and the epistles there. Who wrote the text? Is he named in the text? Can he be identified or deduced by the text? I mean, does he name himself or does it not name? Hebrews doesn't give a name. Paul generally names himself. Peter generally names himself. Is that Peter talking, or is that a pseudo name? In other words, someone wrote on behalf of Peter or something like this. I don't believe that to be the case in our New Testament, but there's some who espouse that. What does the external evidence say with regard to that? What is the occasion? What precipitated the writing of the text? In Galatians, it was Judaizers threatening the salvation of Paul's converts. In 1 Corinthians, it was a letter carried by Chloe's people to Paul with regard to issues that precipitated the need for Paul to address the issues that there. And he addressed several issues, and then, I think it's in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, he begins to answer the specific questions that came in the letter from Chloe. Revelation, it was a threat of apostasy among the 7 churches. They were brought on by oppression and persecution. So what precipitated the writing? What was the occasion? Why is he writing this? They're all what you call occasional writings. They wrote because some event occurred, some occasion occurred. And so they responded to that occasion. What was that? It's good to know that when you study any text. When and where was it written? Was it written during Claudius's reign, during Nero's reign, during Domitian's reign? Or was it written from prison? Does Paul's 2 Timothy letter, does it carry more sensitivity to know that that was his final, waiting his death to the chopping block there? Knowing what was expecting, that he was expecting to die for preaching Christ from prison. And from John was in the island of Patmos. Was he a political prisoner there? I mean, just understanding the situation of which the writer and the audience were in, and where he was written from and when, makes a significant difference. If it was written, say during Nero's reign, well, clearly Nero, I think, reigned to AD 60, I want to say 8. And so if you espouse some book or letter written in that time frame, then clearly it had to be done before then, before it was his term ended, or Domitian's reign, or Claudius's, and these kind of things. Who were the recipients? The Jewish Christians wanting to return to Judaism, that's just the Hebrew writer addresses. or the Gentile Christians intermixing with Jewish Christians and having issues and difficulty, as Paul addresses in Romans? Or was it a congregation that he's addressing specifically, like Corinthians, or maybe multiple congregations in the general epistles that Peter is writing and James writes to, or in Revelation 1 verse 11 is a write to a book, write in a book, John is told, what you see and send it to the 7 churches. It's important to know as you interpret and analyze the text in Revelation, for example, who it's written to. It's not written to you or I. It's written to those 7 churches. The entire book is addressed to those 7 churches. It's important to recognize that. So it's a good study to say, what's going on with these 7 churches when I go to the rest of the book of Revelation. So these background information, historical information, is very significant in our understanding and exegeting whatever passage we're looking at. Who were the recipients? Jewish, we already did this. What was the purpose stated in writing? In John chapter 20, verse 30, John writes, but these things have been written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, that believing you have life in his name. That was the purpose of the Gospel of John, to depict the divinity of Jesus Christ, in contrast to what, I don't say contrast, but in addition to what the synoptic gospel writers produced in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John emphasizes the divinity and then points out that he wrote it so that we can believe that he is the Christ, the Son of God, and have life in his name. Peter writes in 1 Peter 5, verse 12, through Silvanus, our faithful brother, so as I regard him, I have written you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. That's the purpose of 1 Peter. If I'm going to examine a text in 1 Peter, I better recognize not only the background behind the text and the author and the audience, but I better recognize what is its purpose, because it didn't change when I address the text that I'm addressing. That purpose still stands. There's much misapplication of biblical text that's done from pulpits, from pews in the world, all over the place, taking its context, taking out its common context. When you take something out of its context, it can thus mean anything. You can make it mean anything once you pull it out of its context. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That has nothing to do with dunking a basketball, nothing to do with scoring a touchdown or closing a business deal or whatever the case may be. It is Paul under house arrest awaiting trial when he could be put to death for preaching the King of Kings. But instead of being defeated, Paul teaches the church in Philippi that Paul, can endure all and every circumstance because he draws his strength from Jesus Christ. How does that apply to me? How does it apply to that audience? I too can endure all things when I draw my strength from Jesus Christ, the victorious one who had victory over death. That's the misapplication without understanding the context in which the text applies. Matthew 7, verse 1, all the time, judge not that you not be judged. Really? That's not what the text is saying. Yes, it says that, but that's not what the context deals with. It's not a message about tolerance among different belief systems. It's not like, well, don't judge what we teach or what we believe, because it says judge not, let you be judged. You judge me, and we'll judge you. That's not what the text is talking about. Read the rest of it. It's not a warning about speaking about certain actions or behaviors, but a prescriptive on how to judge one another by first removing the plank in your own eye and then remove the speck out of your brother's eye. When we observe the larger literary context, so we're point 2, literary analysis. How does the text contribute to the whole book? Number one, let me suggest read the book. If you can, in one sitting. That's the best thing to do. Even the longer ones. Most books take you 15 to 30 minutes to read, some an hour, some longer. Then read it again. And read it again. Consider the immediate context of the text of interest. That is within that paragraph, the paragraph in front of it, the paragraph after, within the context of the topic that's being discussed by that author. Who is he addressing in that context? What is the subject of that context? How does the text fit within that context? Is it rhetorical? In other words, is he just expecting a certain? It's more like, it's not sarcastic, but rhetorical. Like, I can't think of an example. I'm going blank. Is it figurative? Is it literal? Psalm 46, verse 10, the first half of that says, "Be still and know that I am God." Coffee mugs have that. plaques have it on the wall in their homes. It's on posters, and most people see it as this beautiful message that God is just, it's a message of relax, be cool, God's in control, He's got this. Well, there's some truth to that, but it's missing the context. The rest of the verse says, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. That's the rest of that text, the one verse. The point is God is in control, but it's about His will being done and not my own. I want to take a moment just about the will of God. This is a little off because this brings up a lot. I want to change views here real quick. Let me see if I can do this. How about that? Life is good when you know what you're doing. Even when you don't, life is still good. I want to move to, that works, okay. So, I want you to learn this acrostic, I, do an I, C, U. What does that stand for?
See,
Yeah, that's what everybody says. No, it's not. We're talking about the will of God, okay? So it is His ideal will, number one, ideal. It is His conditional will, D, and His ultimate will. I doubt I spelled any of that right, but it doesn't matter. His ideal will, His conditional will, His ultimate will. His ideal will, for example, in 2 Peter 3, verse 9, God is not slack concerning as some count slackness, but is patient towards you, not desiring any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. That's the ideal will. That's what God desires for all of mankind. For His Son died for all mankind. That's the ideal will. God's conditional will. Well, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. We'll talk about that begotten later on today. But He gave His only begotten Son, and whoever should believe in Him might not perish, but have eternal life. That is His conditional will. What's the condition? Whoever believes in Him. It's a condition. If you don't believe in Him, you don't have eternal life. I mean, that's one quality or requirement for it. So ideal will is conditional one. His ultimate will is ultimate will. Let me ask you a question. In His ideal will, can we thwart? Can we thwart His ideal will?
Yeah.
Thwart means disobey.
Yeah.
Can we ignore His ideal? Yeah, we can obey it. We can disobey it. We don't care about repenting. I'm not going to do that. Or can we thwart His conditional will? That is, I'm not accepting that condition. I want my own condition. I'm going to tell you can we thwart His conditional will? Yes, we can. But His ultimate will, you cannot thwart. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may be recompensed for his deeds in his body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Everyone stands before the judgment seat, whether good or bad, whether you're washed in the blood of Christ or not, you still stand before the judgment seat. But if you're washed in the blood of Christ, the wrath of God does not come upon you. I see you. Ideal, conditional, and ultimate will. So much confusion about the will of God. I just wanted to point that out as we sort of reach the point there with regarding people wanting their will to be done and not God's. Let me see if I can switch back to the PowerPoint. Pretend like we're on track. Okay, y'all pretend with me. All right, let's, and then we move forward. It is important that you know the genre of the entire book. The genre is that, I can tell you, listen, the authors are the writers of the letters, the occasional letters, the books, the Gospels, the history acts, or the epistles, the letters, or Revelation, Apocalypse. They didn't know anything about genre. But when they wrote, they automatically wrote within a genre. A genre is nothing more than classification, how to categorize the writings, whether it be, for example, in the New Testament, there are 4 overarching genres. There's the Gospels, like a biography, right? Biographical of Jesus, right? Not a true biographical as we know it, but as one it would be in that time. They wrote biographical things differently than we would today. Acts is a book of history. Epistles, the letters, the occasional letters, and the Apocalypse, of course. Those are genres of the New Testament. They're overarching genres. There are many subtypes narratives, parables, wisdom literature, hymns, exhortation, quotation, prophecy, beatitudes, and on and on and on. Understand and know the genre that it's written. Why does that matter? Well, I would interpret things that are historical in Acts differently than I would, say, in apocalyptic literature. I would interpret certain literature that is a hymnal, Philippians chapter 2, and I think it's 5 and following. Some see that as a hymn. Differently, or I would analyze it differently than I say a wisdom literature or a parable or a prophecy or a beatitude and such. Understand that these literary forms are crucial to proper exegesis. We understand differently. If you read the newspaper, and there's not many people that read it today that I know of anyway, it's a dying art or business. When you read the newspaper, you can read feature stories like the front page or maybe the sports section, or you can read editorials, you can read obituaries, you can read one ads. Those are all different. You don't interpret or analyze what you read in the obituary the same as you would a one ad, or the editorial versus say a sports page, or the front page of the text or feature stories. We approach those differently because they're written differently for a different purpose. The same with the biblical text. We have to approach those with understanding the genre in which it's written. The Bible is not some accidental pile of miscellaneous collection of text. It is the words of God poured out for our understanding. But it is like a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece fits perfectly within the whole, but taking any one piece out of the whole does not accurately give the intended picture. You can't look at the piece and say, aha, I got it. No, and you don't until you put it with the whole. And you understand its place in the whole. That's the whole point. Set time aside to read the book, meditate upon it, read it again. Divide the book into teaching blocks that reflect what the writer has said on specific themes. I want to look at a little bit at that tonight. Observe the syntax later as we go through the grammatical hierarchy things. We're going to be looking at things to look for, purpose clauses, therefore, for this reasons, or conditional clauses, if this, then that, rhetorical statements, and more. So as we go up this hierarchical change, which is in the next couple of charts, as we start with morphology at the bottom and start rising up, we'll start looking at some of these syntactical components, and such as rhetoric and purpose clauses, and such as this, conditional clauses, and how they apply in our exegesis. So let's switch gears here and move, and I want to talk some more about linguistics, specifically morphemes. They're extremely important, and we'll talk about why. A little fun chart, comic book, young man, homeschool, I guess. Write the words that's the opposite of the following words. And so one of them is nobody. What's the opposite of nobody? You and I might say anybody. He thinks somebody says yes, body. So he's probably right, but it's just not a real word. I'm just trying to have fun, okay? All right, fun's over, let's get to work. So tonight, we looked at this chart. Meaning exists on all levels, but we're going to start at the lowest level. It's not truly the lowest level. There's a level lower for all the phonemes. That is sounds that are organized or formed into basic units. They don't carry meaning in themselves, but they serve to help differentiate meaning. In other words, b is a B, right? Is a P, right? Well, it doesn't carry a meaning, but when I put it with others, bill versus pill, it serves to differentiate the meaning. But in of themselves, phonemes don't carry meaning, but they help us to understand and differentiate. So it's good. There's value in understanding how sounds are made. The air comes up through the throat and the lungs and the voice box, and how it goes out and how it's stopped and all that kind of stuff. But we're not going to get into that here. Morphemes are considered the minimum units of speech that convey specific meaning. A dog, D-O-G, is a morpheme, right? It is the smallest unit of meaning that could communicate some meaning. Is indivisible. I can't break dog up into D and O and G and expect to have meaning. It has to be together as D-O-G, right? Now, I can do dogs, plural, and D-O-G, and then the S. Those are two morphemes now. There is specific meaning in dog, and there's a specific meaning in the plural S. Now, S as a letter by itself doesn't have it, but as its function as a plural has specific meaning. Or ES, for some words would use ES, there's specific meaning. So a morpheme is broken down into smaller units and still carry meaning. Trying to find it indivisible, the smallest unit possible. I want to talk about, I found this on the 4th grade level of morphology, and I thought it was interesting, it helped me understand, so I thought I'd walk through it. This is where, I'm not going to switch to a share screen later, but this is where it'd be nice for me to be able to mark on the screen. I'm going to do that later tonight, but not now, because it takes more time. At the bottom of this, you notice the morpheme definition at the very bottom blue chart. The smallest unit that can carry meaning in a word, we just said that, we're right on track with the rest of the 4th graders. Includes bases, which we would call roots. Bases, affixes, which are prefixes or suffixes, as well as infixes, in other words, in the middle of the word, and connecting vowels, or connector vowels, and Greek has a lot of this, all of this. And so it says the letter or letters between a plus sign, so she's given a definition, the morph plus O plus log plus Y, those are individual morphemes. Morph defines as a base or root morph, and it carries a meaning. The root does carry a meaning, but in and of itself, it's not a word, so it doesn't have a meaning. It's not used in a context, but it does carry with it a meaning. And morph carries a meaning of form or structure. It comes from the Greek morpheme, meaning form. You find it in words like, I have to read here, like amorphous or metamorphosis or polymorphic or anthropomorphic. I think we've heard that word used in some of the pulpit from now and then, if people want to impress you. And then there's a connector vowel, the O here for morphology. And then, of course, log this is a compound word between morph and log. 2 roots that are compounded together, connected by this connector vowel. And its root or base is speech or word or count or reason. There's a range of meanings from the Greek word logos or logos. And it has a suffix, another morpheme with a Y. And you put the log and the Y together, it's called a stem. We're going to get into that later. So here's a quick 4th grade perspective of a morphology. So I thought that would be interesting. Let me move to the next slide, because now we're going to go a little deeper beyond 4th grade, unless you guys want to stay at the 4th. No, we don't need that. So notice here, I want to play this short video. Notice the language spectrum that he talks about, because that's where we're going, okay? So the language spectrum is
the smallest unit of meaning in a language is called.
Why don't I have sound? I think I probably didn't press it. Let me ask you guys online, we'll play. Can y'all hear it online, or just probably something I didn't press to make that. Be right back. If not, we'll just skip it for time. Let me try it. But I'll tell you what, we're going to skip it for time. What he's going to point out is this range. And so, what I want to get to, as we look at English, Hebrew, Greek language spectrum, understand that roots carry a central core meaning. You add to it affixes, and it gives additional meaning or changes the form. That is how it's used in the sentence, by adding to it. Prefixes add to the meaning. A prefix adds to meaning, okay? A suffix determines how the word class. In other words, I can go from a noun or a verb to a noun or a noun to a pronoun or a noun to an adjective by changing the suffix on it. And ultimately, it's a different word. And it also can change, the suffix can change the function in the sentence. Is it a subject, or is it possessive, or is it indirect object, or is it direct object? Just by changing the suffix. For example, in the chart, we have a numbers, singular and plural. Number, the Greek verb, lu is the root, lambda, upsilon, lu, and you put different endings to it. Well, the omega ending, it's got a lot of information packed into it. That is going to tell us I lose. It's first person, singular, present, active, indicative. Embedded in the verb is, in fact, the person, I. So I don't have to say I lose. I just say luo. It's all embedded in the word. It's automatically known to be singular. It's I, singular. It's not plural as in luo men. You see the plural luo men. We lose, first person, plural, present, active, indicative. So by changing, it's called the cases, we're changing the inflection, or not, they're all inflections, the declensions, we can determine how the word functions in the sentence. Who is it referring to? First person, second, and third person. Is it plural, is it singular? Is it the present? In other words, is it occurring in the time of the author speaking, or was it past? Is he speaking past tense? Like you lose, or lost, or whatever. Or is it future? You will lose. All that's embedded in the affixes and the changes there. And that's really fascinating. Old English actually had cases and had embedded a fusional language. But as we moved to Middle English and to modern English, all that went away, with some exceptions. Him, her, or him, his, he, him, his. Those are inflectional changes and those kind of things. So, English morphemes. Talk about free morphemes. Words that stand alone. We were talking about like dog or cat or picture. They're free in the sense that they don't have you don't have to attach anything else to it to give meaning. It has meaning in itself. It's a free morpheme. If I gave you a handout called I think Free Morphemes Prefixes.pdf. I was going to go to it, but for time, you have it there. Lists various prefixes associated with free-form morphemes. They're not as significant as what I want to get to here next. We go to what's called bound morphemes. There's some morphemes that you add to a root as a prefix or a suffix that by themselves they have no meaning, and they only function when you bound it to a root, when you bound it to something else. And so they're bound to morphemes. And they can be derivational or inflectional. Derivational, don't worry about all these terms. Derivational, really prefixes. That determines, the prefix there is going to determine derivational affixes indicate the word class. You know, common, C-O-M-M-O-N, is an adjective. But commonly, with an ly, is an adverb. By adding the suffix ly, you change it to an adverb. It's a different word. Derivational affixes also add meaning. And uncommon changes the meaning of common. These can form new words. Inflectional affixes are signaling devices that indicate grammatical characteristics. We just talked about person, I sing versus he sings. Number, that is hat versus hats, plural. Tense, dream, I dream versus I dreamed, past tense. Or case, a girl versus girls, possessive, it belongs to her. Or comparison, nice versus nicer versus nicer. All that's embedded in the affixes, the suffix generally. And so, for example, let's look at a couple of, undeniable. The deny is a word, it's a noun. You put un and a bowl and the prefix and a bowl is at the end of it, you get undeniable. Well, you've changed the word. You made it into I think that's an adverb. Or you've inflectional. It's deny is still denying, but you've changed denying that now it's functioning in a ongoing present tense. It's still deny. It's not a new word. So we're going to look at some of these and emphasizing derived versus inflectional, which we just touched on. Here's an example I want to point out to. So the root word struck is to build, it has to carry meaning. Well, I can reconstruct, I can deconstruct, I can reconstructed, I can instruct, or I can instructive, I can instructively obstruct, or superstructure. So all these different additions, affixes to it, help either change the meaning or how it functions in the sentence, or the word class as a noun to an adverb or an adjective, or gives them information about the grammatical aspect of it, first person, second, third, the number, the gender, these kind of things. Another good example is the word rupt, R-U-P-T, to break or burst out, to break or burst. And you see all the words that comes from rupture, corrupt, bankrupt, abrupt, interrupts, uninterrupted, erupts, disrupt, and on and on. And by changing the various prefixes or suffixes, you change how the word functions in the sentence. So this is what the language does in Hebrew and Greek. And except in Hebrew and Greek, it's built into the word. And I will show you that. Here's, just for fun, let me do this way. Okay, anti-disestablishmentarianism is the longest English non-technical word. Okay, it has three prefixes: anti, dis, and e, and the root is stay, S-T-A, stop, and it has 6 suffixes: the miel, the ish, the mint, the er, and ism. Anybody know what it means? The nice thing about understanding this is that when you think about it, you start to begin to be able to understand what the word is trying to mean or says. And basically what this word is talking about is the theory in opposition to the idea that the church should be separated from the state. Establishmentarianism. Ism is typically, not good. Anyway, that's kind of, from an English perspective, we're going to see the same thing in Greek. Greek morphology, the noun. Remember, the root carries meaning. Prefix adds to that meaning. Suffix determines the word class, whether it's functioning as a noun, an adjective, or verb. I just changed the ending of it, and I can change how the word functions. I can change the ending of it. I can change whether it's a noun or an adjective. But I'm still dealing with the same root. And this is the significance I want to bring out, because if you are able to identify the root and are able to identify the prefixes and suffixes, you've gone a long way to be able to interpret the word without even a dictionary. For example, here we have the root dol, dalet, not dalet, that's delta, that's Hebrew. Delta, omicron, lambda, dol. If you have a prefix a, it's adol with the suffix adolos. Well, adolos is the word. The prefix itself, is something that negates, right? It is, in this case, it negates. And the os, the omicron sigma, determines that it's functioning in the subject, as a subject, a nominative, as a masculine or feminine. There's something to that. And singular. And it means deceiteless. You go from deceit to one who's truthful, who's deceiteless. The same with zoom, zoom, os. Now it's an adjective. It functions. The adds changes from a noun to an adjective. Although this word I think only functions as an adjective. Zoomos, the os, nominative, masculine, feminine, singular, means leavenless. Means unleavened bread. Our unleavened bread on Sunday communion is azumos, is unleavened. And atheos. Well, it's atheos. Once you add the a to it, it forms an adjective. Theos is the noun. Now you put the prefix, it's going to form an adjective, and it's going to have the meaning of less or negating it. Atheos, nominative, masculine, singular, is godless. Dunatos, adjective, nominative, masculine, singular, meaning powerless. So that's how this functions. I want to bring that out. I gave you a handout called the 96 Roots. And it's a look, and I want you to look, and I was going to bring it on here to bring it out over time. You can find it. The Greek word dik, the D-I-K, the delta, iota, kappa. There are over 15 Greek words that are formed from it. meaning to do right, to show or point out what the thing that is right. And so we get righteous, justice, justify, and these kind of words that come from that. It's a great method to expand your vocabulary. I gave also a handout called the Greek root charts, and that's just for your reference there. If we look at, so if you, a lexicon, a root, it comes from our case, that comes from Indo-European, such as gin. Gin is the root, it carries the meaning of beget, or become, I become. We have genao, and I have begotten, I become, or I begotten. Thon means to die, thanatos means I die, or it's a noun, death. Kaleo, the verb I call. And you can combine roots that form different stems. So, anybody know what a prophates is? You've heard from the pulpit. I know prophates. Sounded prophates. Prophates. Prophet. Yeah. Okay. So prophates. Prophet. You combine it with pseudo. Anybody know what pseudo means? A liar. It's a false one, right? So, you know, I mean, it combines in this way. And oiko despotes. What's a despot? Despot? Evil ruler, right? One who's puts his thumb down. He's the master of the house. Oiko despotes is the master of the house. Ek paruomai is just referring to going, combined with the ek, and you have the going out. We're going to talk about fallacies with roots in a minute here too. We'll take a break just a minute. We'll talk about Greek derivational prefixes. If I add a prefix to it, add it to the stem or to the root, it gives additional meaning to it. Timia comes from the root meaning to honor. But atimia is to dishonor, not honoring. Eulagia, log is from the meaning of word or reason or count. You has a separate meaning of good, and so it's blessing or well spoken up. Emithanes, thon is from, we just saw the root meaning to die. Thanatos is death. So thanes is the root or the prefix. Hemia, hemi is meaning half, so it's half day. And so you can, if you start to capture the root and understand the change, what the morphemes mean. I gave you a handout called Derivational Bound Morphemes for Prefixes. It's fascinating to look at these. You have A used in 3 different senses, as I don't have it in front of me, so I don't have it memorized. But you can see how it's used in different contexts and other prefixes that are used. And then you have suffixes, such as added to indicate parts of speech to modify the meaning. Fawn is from the word meaning to murder, but a fanus is one who murders, becomes a murderer. Sark is flesh, but sarkikos is carnal, that is pertaining to the flesh. Fawn is one about I appear or see, but phaneroo is I call or I manifest to be seen. So by understanding the root and understanding the changes to it, you can understand the meaning. I gave some handles called bound morphemes for noun suffixes and one for adjective suffixes. A couple more charts, we'll take a break. Then there's Greek inflectional affixes. Looking at our, and we're going to look at those in our grammar tonight. But inflectional affixes add to the account of such factors as person, number, case, aspect, and voice. You know, for you and I in English, if I want to add person, I, we, or excuse me, number, singular, plural, I versus we, or person, I, singular, we, plural, first or second or third person, I've got to add a word. It's not embedded in my words. I have to add a word. I have to say, I went. where in Greek and Hebrew, it's embedded in the word, it's fused in the language. This makes it a little more difficult for us because we're not used to it. Anthropo, the omega with the subscript iota underneath it, it means for a man, or to a man, or with a man. Lu, here's the root. Lusometha is we will lose ourselves. It's future because it inserts that sigma in the middle of this. Metha is more of a passive. Something is done to me. So lusometha is something that will be done to me. Lusometha is that we will lose ourselves. Lusate is the tau epsilon ending is imperative. So I know how it's functioning in the sentence. Lusate, the sigma alpha, is an aorist function. I know it's something that it's imperative that we lose it. It's almost a command. I think this is the last chart, and we'll take a break. Hopefully, I didn't lose everybody already. Talk about Ruth Allison. Often people presuppose that every word has a meaning that's bound up from within its components, its roots. And there's some truth to that. And what they presuppose and conclude is that meaning is determined by its etymology, that is, its root, where it came from. And sometimes that can be true. While a word or meaning may reflect its root, such as ekbalo, are two different compound words, and it does carry the meaning I cast out, or I throw out, or I put out. You cannot automatically assume that its etymology, its root, carries the meaning in the context. For example, apostolos, we understand is apostle, and we know that the noun apostle means apostle, but the verb apostello, meaning I send, and what we want to do is conflate the two, and we'll say the apostle is one who sent. Well, there's some truth that the apostles are one who sent, but that's not always the truth. In the preface of the New King James Bible, it says that we're told that literally, excuse me, I'll skip one here, that the apostle is one who is not necessarily sent out, but is one who's a messenger. And normally he's the messenger who carries the message, but sometimes he's just a messenger. And the emphasis is not on the person carrying the message, but on the message. And so to presume that the apostle is one who's sent, and that's built from the etymology and not context, is a mistake. You may get that from the context, but not from the etymology. That's the point. Monogenes. Anybody know where the word monogenes is used? You probably heard it from the pulpit.
Only begotten.
Monogenes in John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Mono is one. Genes is from the word genao, and to beget. And so people assume or formulate that that's begotten. Well, the problem with that is using that as a root fallacy is that even in John 3:16, if you look at monogenes, it's the same word that's used in Hebrews 11, verse 17, where Isaac is said to be Abraham's monogenes. What's wrong with Isaac being the monogenes of Abraham? The only begotten.
Children.
Abraham had more than one child, didn't he? He's not the only begotten. So by assuming that the etymology, the root of mono and genao, genes, carries forward in the context is a big mistake. The meaning in context refers to the unique one. Was Jesus Christ the unique Son of God, the one and only? Yeah. Was Isaac the unique son of Abraham?
Yes.
The one and only. Not one and only begotten, but the one and only unique one. He's unique because he's the chosen one, right? So it's a mistake to assume that the root carries forward, etymology carries forward its meaning in the context. It may, but you have to assess that. Ecclesia is one that's used all the time. It eats me up. Ecclesia, you've heard from the pulpit, called out, right? Is ek from out, ecclesia from the word klao, to call, and so they call out. Well, that's no more accurate than to say a butterfly is a stick of butter with wings. That's the etymology of it, and to put the two etymologies together and interpret that's the meaning is inaccurate. Ecclesia does not mean the called out. True, the church is the called, but that's not what the meaning is. It is correctly interpreted in many places as congregation or the church, but it means assembly. For example, in Acts chapter 19 and verse 32, there the ecclesia gathers together to condemn Paul. It was a riot. It's not the church. It's not the called out ones. It's the assembly. They happen to be a riot. The assembly in Acts 9 verse 31, the ecclesia is correctly interpreted as the church. Context says that assembly, it means assembly. That assembly in that context is the church. So that's a correct translation, understanding of that word. But my point is that you cannot make the assumption that the etymology of the word, the root of the word, carries forward in its meaning context. Context determines the meaning. It may and it may not. And that's the point I want to bring out. So let's take a short 5-minute break, get some water, and come back, do some grammar. And I'm going to do the grammar relatively quick. Although I hate to do that, I'm going to try to touch on some things with the grammar. Any thoughts or questions that I've dominated all this time? Anybody online? Can y'all hear everybody okay? Are y'all asleep?
No, everything's good.
Okay, all right. Just making sure I didn't lose it. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. Thank you, guys. Okay, we're back. Can you hear me? I think we're on. So I want to push through and let's see, do I want to do this with, no, wait, we're going to see with the slides and not the share screen because time reasons. All right, I want to go back to the alphabet with folks because I didn't realize I had this way. Oh, man, this is going to take a while. Okay. Just as a familiarization, you have the lowercase and the uppercase. By the way, I gave you a handout which has an alphabet, both the uppercase, lowercase, but also has transliteration. If you take the Greek letter and turn it into an English letter, most of them look exactly the same. Some of them don't. The new in Greek looks like a V in English, but it's an N. So some of them don't. So transliteration is when you take the letter from one language and just transliterate and use the letter from your own language, so Greek to English kind of thing. And so sometimes if you struggle with the Greek letters or Hebrew, when we get to it, the transliteration is a little easy to read, although truthfully Hebrew's transliteration is not that easy to read. Aleph is Hebrew. Alpha, beta, Hebrew. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta. The lowercase and the uppercase, the names on there is alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Alpha sounds like ah. It's a long A. And that long is how much air is passing through. I'm going to allow more air to pass through than A. A is short. Is long. Okay, so that's more air goes through. Beta, sounds like a B is involved. Gamma, it like a G as in gift. Delta, like a D is in dog. Most of these are pretty easy, should be straightforward for you for the most part. Epsilon, oh my cat's got off, how about that? Epsilon, the lowercase e, is an as an echo. Zeta, looks like our Z a little bit. And it has a DZ sound to it, although sometimes it's just a Z, as in kudzu. We have a lot of kudzu in the South. The DZ sound, as in days. Eta it looks like our N, but it's more like our A as a short A, 8, as an AY kind of sound. Theta, we don't have that in our English, but we have a TH, and that functions as the theta, as in thin. And then, same thing, how about that? I forgot to say chart twice. Okay, good. Iota, as in I, and has more of a long I sound, or E. Kappa is like a K, as in key. Lambda is like an L. Doesn't look like an L. Has a little bit of an L kind of look, but not much. It's almost like a teepee with a top to it. L as in lock, and mu as an M. It doesn't really look like an M, but kind of close, as in mom. And then nu as in the, this is where it looks like a V, but it's an N, as in nail. It's a nu. And then zeta, excuse me, Z. See, the uppercase is really funny looking, but zeta or Z is the this kind of a backwards 3 with a tail to it, and it's like a KS sound, like in fox. You know? English is funny, and X has this KS sound to it, fox, and so the Z carries that. Omicron is a short O, or one of those, short O, as in often. P is in pi, on. Rho, it looks like a P, but it's an R, as in rhyme. There's two S's, sigma. There's the S that's used within the text, in the word, and there's the S that's used at the end of the word. If it's at the end of the word, it looks like RS. Similar, a little different tail. If it's in the beginning or in the middle of the word, it's going to look like a baseball cap. And it's just an S, as in Sam. And that says what I just said about the sigma, such as in theos. Anyway, the tau is like a T, as in T as in tap. The upsilon is the what we would call a U, as in boot, oot. And this will be our last slide for the vocab or the alphabet of phi. PH sound is in phone. The key, the CH sound is an ake, key. And the C as the PSI, PS sound, and oops. And then the omega, the alpha, the omega, Jesus says, looks like a W, but it's an omega, as the long O as an obey. Highlight a couple things you want to pay attention to. There's some letters are easy to confuse, but others I mentioned these a couple times, but here you have in writing the gamma and the nu, the zeta and the xi, the theta and the phi, the nu and the upsilon, the omicron and the sigma, the P and the tau. I don't know why that's easy to confuse, but I guess because really the P looks like a tau, but it has two lines, and the tau has one vertical line down. The phi and the C, and then talk about punctuation. This is the pronunciation, not punctuation. Can't read. So when there are two gammas that come together. There we go. Two gammas that come together, then the first gamma sounds like an N. So it's an NG sound, like in ring. So if you got a gamma kappa, you get the same thing, that gamma sounds like an N. Normally a gamma sounds like a G, but you don't want to say G together, so the first gamma will have an N sound, as in ring, or with the gamma kappa, as in drink, NK. Or as in gamma xi, then also drink in case now. Angelos is not angelos, it's angelos. And so that's just pronunciation. The vowels we talked about last week, you have these, pull them up, put them in different categories for you, short, long, and well, there are two of them that are always short, epsilon and omega. And two of them that are always long, eta and omega. Epsilon and omicron are always short. Eta and omega are always long. And alpha, iota, and epsilon can be either short or long. That only matters when you see how words change. Long vowel reacts one way, short vowel reacts another way. But just so you know that there. We talked about the iota subscript last time. When it follows a long vowel, the iota, the subscripts, it comes underneath the vowel. So when there's a iota following an alpha, then it's going to subscript it, and you get you don't pronounce the iota. You don't pronounce the iota. So like cardia is, you don't have cardia. And the same with the long vowel eta. So when the alpha can be shorter or long, so when it's functioning long, it's followed by the iota subscription, don't pronounce the iota. It's that simple. The eta is always a long vowel. When there's a iota following it, it subscripts it and you don't pronounce it. It's still there, you just don't pronounce it. It's put in the box, you don't pronounce it, as an agape. So it's not agape. And I think the reason it's that way, it's too hard to pronounce, go from a long vowel to a short vowel of iota. And then the long vowel omega, it followed by iota, a subscript, and you get O as in logo or logo. Diphthongs we talked about a little bit last week. And there's some that alpha iota, epsilon iota, omicron iota, upsilon iota are pronounced as a single. Alpha iota is a single vowel. Isle, we have it in English, same thing. Epsilon iota, freight. Omicron iota is an oil. Upsilon iota is in sweet, wheat. And alpha upsilon is an owl. Epsilon upsilon is in feud, and last one, omicron upsilon as in soup. I put it in this order to remember. If I see a vowel ending two of them together and it ends in iota, I'm thinking diphthong, and I pronounce it as one letter. If I see a vowel, two vowels together and ends in an upsilon, I'm thinking the same thing. And basically, that's my starting point. The number, in other words, singular or plural. In English, we add an S or an ES to make it plural, right? Boy becomes boys. Box becomes boxes, add an ES to it. There are rules of why ES versus ES, but I'm not getting into them. Greek, you do the same kind of thing, but you use different endings. Phone is voice, but I changed the alpha ending to phonai, and I get voices. It's plural. So I got the same root. I changed the ending. That's the inflection. That's the case ending. And I went from a noun that's singular as a subject to a noun that's singular or plural as a subject. Same with cardia, singular noun, meaning the heart. It's the subject. To cardiae, meaning hearts, plural. And gender, in other words, masculine, feminine. In English, you have masculine, feminine. And host is a masculine, hostess is feminine. I'm hosting the Zoom meeting, so it's masculine. Otherwise, that'd be the hostess. Steward is masculine. Stewardess is feminine. So in English, that's how we handle gender. But in Greek, gender is fused in the case ending. It's embedded. You talk about fused language. Masculine, feminine, and neuter are the various genders that Greek have. It's not based on, Robert, you're masculine because you're male. That may be true, but that's not how it's determined. These are nothing more than grammatical categories that determine what's masculine, feminine, or neuter. And they're only important because words work in agreement in a sentence, and masculine words work with masculine adjectives. Neuter words work with neuter adjectives, and feminine words work with feminine adjectives, and these kind of things. But all you do is change the ending. Phone, voice, is feminine. Cardia, also feminine. The alpha and the eta and the alpha ending tells me it's a noun and it's feminine. I know that because of how it ends. A masculine word like logos ends the omicron signal. Well, that's masculine. I already know that. So I changed the ending, the case ending. I didn't change the root. I just changed the case ending to determine how it functions, or how it functions within itself as a masculine word, a singular word, as a plural word, and that kind of thing. A neuter word, technon, a child. Because it's an Omicron new ending, I know it's a neuter word. Child is neuter, it's not masculine or feminine. Again, it's a grammatical category, not necessarily because the person's feminine or masculine, or the dog is masculine and the cat is feminine. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the grammatical category, categorizing words.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is logos ever
I'm
feminine?
sorry?
Is logos ever feminine?
No, logos is never feminine. A noun stays in the same category. Now, there are what we call third declension nouns that can be masculine or feminine. Third declension, the root ends with a constant. With first and second declension, the root ends with a vowel. That's all. Okay? Those, they just didn't break out into masculine versus feminine. They just have a masculine feminine category, is all, and a neuter category. But no, logos, for example, is always masculine and never be feminine. Cardia is always feminine, never be masculine. It could be plural, and I know it's feminine because of the ending, case ending. So if I learn the case endings, that paradigm, I can understand how that word functions as plural, singular, its gender, its number, or its first person, second, or third, singular, plural, or is it masculine, feminine, or neuter? That ending tells us that. The word itself didn't change in meaning, but how it's used does. So in English, cases we have case endings, we have cases in English. We just don't necessarily have case ending, we have some. Nominative means subject. So if we talk about nominative cases, in English it means subject, in Greek it means subject. So I, singular, is the subject of the sentence. We, plural, is the subject of the sentence. It's because it's nominative. A genitive is possessive. Now, generally, we're going to talk more about it. And my, in English, is singular. It's possessive. Your is plural. It's possessive. Dative normally means to, for, or with. So singular would be to me, or for me, or with me. It functions as the indirect object. So I went to the store. I went to the store to get bread. To get bread is dative. It gives you different, and it's the purpose of going was to buy bread. Went is the verb of going out. Accusative is the direct object. So I cannot be accusative in English. I has to be the subject because the direct object cannot be I in English. Me cannot be the subject, grammatically speaking, in English, right? There's my English teacher right there. And so us is plural in English. Now Greek does the same thing, it just does it with the endings of the words. We have to add a word in English to do that. The case endings indicate how the noun functions as the subject, nominative, as the possessive, genitive, as the dative, in other words, to, for, or with, or as the direct object. So a nominative case, for example, is using the subject of the verb. So he phone is the noun, it's the subject. He phone, the voice. So it's going to say the voice. Cardii, there's a diphthong, it's the alpha iota, it's the iota, or the alpha, oh, it's a diphthong, pronounced as an I. Cardii is, where's cardi mean? Okay, so cardii is singular or plural? Plural. Okay, and so it means hearts, plural. And so the subject, the nominative answers the question of who. The Son of God gave the gift to man. Son is the subject. It's the nominative. So it would be halios in I didn't write it in Greek, but it would be halios in Greek. That is the nominative case. It is the subject of the sentence. That's how I know the Son functions as the subject. That's how I know it's singular. That's how I know it's gender, masculine. And here, phone, the voice, I know it's feminine because of the case ending. I also know because of the article. I know it's singular because of the case ending. Phone is the voice, and it functions as a noun with that case ending. Cardia, the same thing before. but it functions as a subject. Genitive case is typically possessive or making relationships between other words. Taste phones. I'm using the same word phone, okay? Phone means voice. I just changed the ending. Instead of phone, I'm going to make it phonace, and that now says it's possessive. It's of the voice. That's all it does. Cardion is going to be of the heart, but it's plural, of the hearts. The omega nu, tells me it's plural. So of hearts. And so here, the genitive case answers the question of whose. It's the Son of God. The of God is the genitive. Hagios would be the Son. Of God, theos would become theou. Hagios, theou is the Son of God. And so I can know how it's used in the sentence by that case ending. So the dative case is used to indicate indirect object. For example, phone becomes phone, same pronunciation, but there we got a long eta with an iota that was at the end of it, and it's subscript, so I don't pronounce it. So te phone is the subject, is not the subject, it is the indirect object. For example, it would be for, to, or with the voice. And that's how we would add the words for the voice, with the voice, to the voice, but in Greek it's just te phone. And I could recognize because of the subscript iota. Cardiais is also theta, but it's plural. And so it'd be to or for or with parts. And so here it answers, the dative case answers for who, to, for, or with whom. And our sentence, the Son of God gave the gift, who? To the man. English preposition to, or for, and also with is added to that translation. In the accusative case, the direct object, so we have tain phone. That cannot be the subject because phone is the subject. It cannot be the direct object because te phone with the subscript iota is the indirect object. It cannot be genitive because that's tain phonace, and this is tain phone. It has a different ending. It's still the voice, but now it's the object of the verb. And so it would be the voice just as the subject of the voice, but in our English it would come after the verb, where phone would come before the verb, it would be the subject. Does that make a little sense? You see how it's working? Cardias, I know the ending, the root hasn't changed, it's still hard, but now it's plural and it's functioning as the direct object, as after the verb. And so we get hearts. And so the accusative case answers the question of what? The Son of God gave what? He gave the gift to the man. So the Son is the subject. Of God is the possessive genitive case. Son is nominative. Of God is the genitive. Gave is the verb. What did he give? In the accusative case would be the gift. To whom he gave, it was to the man. The Son of God gave the gift to the man. And that's how it functions. In Greek, you use it with less words because it's embedded in the inflection in the case. So just to give you an example, there are different frameworks for, we'll go through quickly. The nominative for, I put the names in here. I'm going to skip over this. There we go. Okay, I do have it in here. I thought so. The nominative in logos, log is the root, from sigma, tells me that it's at the article, tells me that it's functioning in a nominative subject case. But let me pull all these up. I'll go through them real quick. So I built this little matrix, my tabs off here. This little matrix that tells me how the word functions. It's the same word. It hasn't changed its meaning. Log is still word or count or these kind of things, but I put an omicron sigma ending, and I know it's functioning as a subject, as a masculine singular. I put an omicron upsilon at the ending of it. I know it's functioning now in the genitive, giving possessiveness. That is, and so it can't be the subject at all. It's not possible. To logo, the omega subscript iota does its function as the direct object.
So it's to the word, or with the word, or for the word. And tonal gone, the Omicron new ending tells me it's functioning as the accusative case, the direct object. It's the word. I received the word. Well, I, the subject, received would be the verb, the word would be tonal gone. You do the same thing in the plural, put the Omicron the other ending for this subject. For the possessive, the Omicron new ending. For the data, the ois ending. For the accusative plural would be the us ending. So you have these different paradigms for masculine words, singular and plural. You have them for you have them for neuter, okay? My tabs are messed up. You have them for first declension, you have them for second declension, you have them for third declension. Declension is just a way to categorize the word based on the root that's used, how the root stem is. So I'm going to show you the matrix and you can have it for your study. And then you can pass this. Okay, so notice you can see this. So here's that matrix. This is all the Greek case endings. Every noun has a case ending, and it either functions as a singular or plural noun. It may function as a subject, or as a possessive, or as a direct object, or indirect object. And these endings determine that. First declension, second declension, first declension is always pending. All first declension are always pending. And there's reason that they're defined this way is because their stem ends in either alpha or eta. And that's why it's first declension. So it has to do with the ending of the root of the stem. Second declension is either masculine or neuter. And so there's masculine endings versus the neuter ending. And then you have what's called third declension. And they're only in a separate category because the root ends in a constant versus the root ending in a vowel. And that's the reason it's the third declension. Otherwise, it's really just a matrix of how these words end and then tells you how they're used. A little bit further, just a little bit, okay? For those who've had some Greek, you know, the nominative case does function as a subject, but it does more than that. Nominative case, and no matter which declension, if it's second declension, it's going to be masculine or neuter. If it's first declension, it's going to be feminine. And you can tell by the ending of the words. Or third declension, you can tell by the ending of the words. And yes, it does function as the subject. It's frequently the subject of the verb. In Colossians 2, verse 2, that their hearts may be encouraged. That's the subject, hearts, cardia. Cardiae, and the alpha iota ending tells me that it's plural. And then it's the subject, nominative plural. And it's feminine. I know it's feminine because of that ending, the alpha iota ending. If I had a pointer I pointed to, you can see it in that second declension plural matrix there. It can function more than just the subject. We can go beyond that, and this is where Daniel Wallace's book, Beyond the Basics, gives a lot more depth. So when you're doing your exegesis, then it's useful to understand how that word functions in a context. A predicate nominative. Nominative means subject, okay? Predicate means it's after the verb, right? You got subject, verb, complement. Well, the verb and anything beyond the verb is called a predicate. So predicate nominative is like predicate subject. And so we have, for example, this is my beloved son. Well, this, it functions as the subject. Is the verb, and my beloved son are all, well, not mine, mine's possessive, but the son and the beloved are all in the nominative case, so they go together. But I know this is my beloved son, is called predicate. You see the hutos meaning the Omicron signal, the hoios meaning the Omicron signal, the agapetos, that's an adjective defining the son. So it has to be in agreement with it, so you know it goes with the son. How do I know agapetes is not going with this? My beloved this. Well, because the casing tells me must agree with hoios. in Matthew 3:17. So those are all nominative cases, but they're not all the subject. So they function as a predicate nominative. God is spirit. Well, theos is the nominative case, but so is pneuma. They're both in the nominative case. They can't both be the subject. One is the subject and one is the predicate nominative. Well, God, because it has the article, is the subject. Is spirit, pneuma is the predicate nominative. So there's more to this. Jesus is the Christ. Well, how do I know it's not Christ is Jesus? Well, there are grammatical rules. Ha, Christos, the Omicron sigma ending tells me it's the subject. It's a nominative case, but it's not functioning as a subject, or it is functioning as a subject. It's not functioning as a subject because it assumes the pronoun, a name, a name. Jesus is the Christ. Would be the person. I just want you to see you can go further. I'm not trying to make us learn it all. Same thing in the genitive case. We think of it as possessive. And yes, it is. Most of the time it's possessive. The slave of the high priest. You see the ending there, the Omicron Upsilon ending in the article, and the Omega Sigma ending in the article, or in the priest for Archaeos. I don't know if that's spelled right now, but that film isn't it. I don't know. Archaeos is the priest, and the Omicron Sigma ending says that they possessive. So it's the slave, Tom DeLong is the slave of the high priest. But it can also function trivial. In other words, the noun can specify sort of a quality or an attribute of a noun that's modified with. Soma, taste, armatias. Tosoma is the body. Well, taste, armatias is written in the genitive case. It's not. So it's the body of sin. The emphasis, it's not the body possessing sin, but the emphasis on the sinful body is emphasis on, it's placed on the sinfulness of the condition. And we use more of an adjectival sense. It can be used in apposition. Genitive noun refers to the same thing as the noun in which it's related. The feast, namely the festival, the feast of the unleavened bread. So the feast, and then you go define the feast. It's the feast of the unleavened bread. That's an apposition. So, hey, erate, aton, arjumon refers to the feast, and then arjumon is, well, I'm talking about the feast of the unleavened bread. So it could be more than possessive, is what I'm trying to get at. Same thing with, okay, I don't know if I have the rest of them or not. I want to point out when you look at lexicons, those glorified dictionaries, you'll always find, if it exists, the nominative case written. So when you look at lexicon, like you want to look at logos, it'll be with the Omicron Sigma in. You won't find logo or logi or logos. You only find it with the nominative in. And you find next to it the genitive, the Omicron Upsilon. That's important to know. You also find the article. It's important to know. The reason is because if I want to know the root, I look at the genitive. And I take the genitive case ending off. In this case, it's pretty easy. And I get lost. So lagu would be the genitive showing upward. Anyway, but my point is you look it up in the lexicon by the nominative form. I did have the data, just had the origin. Typically, data is an indirect object. It takes the action of the verb. Example, in John 4:10, he said, he would have given to you living water. Well, who's he going to give it to? Describe who's receiving it. To you, or with you, or for you in the context. But it can also refer to something that's being referenced. Example, Matthew 5:8, blessed are the pure with reference to their heart. Blessed are the pure in heart. That's talking about in reference to the heart. So it can be more than just an indirect object. It can refer to the means or the instrument by which something occurs. The dative, for example, in Matthew 8:16, he cast out the spirits by means of a word. He cast out by the spirits by his word. Well, it's not It's the means of how he cast out the spirit. It was through the word. And so it can function beyond the indirect object. And so I want you to just be visible or aware of those. The accusative, it's a direct object. There's no question. God loved the world, tom, cosmon. The omicron new ending, that's singular. That is the accusative masculine ending. But it can also function in simple apposition. For example, Andrew, comma, the brother of Simon. Well, the brother of Simon is Ton Andelphal. And that's referring to someone else. Well, that's just giving a description of Simon, or Andrew. Andrew, he's the brother of Simon. So it's not necessarily the direct object. It's getting additional information. That's to be subject of an infinitive. It is necessary for you to prophesy again in Revelation 10:11. My point is that there are other usages besides what we typically teach in first year then, and you need to be aware of that. So that was it. Okay, now I want to do, and I've got just enough time to do it. This is free form. I don't know how well it's going to work. Last week we talked about, in our practical exegesis, this word study analysis of this word eperote. Reading through 1 Peter 3, verse 21, corresponding to that, baptism now saves you. In this parenthetical statement that's inserted, it says not the removal of flesh, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for good conscience. Where the NIV says a pledge to God, a pledge of your conscience to God. We'll look at the exact words in a moment. So I had a bunch of slides about that. Okay, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't help us walk through how to use the tools. And this is to help us learn how to use tools. I don't have all the answers. I'm no tool expert. And if you don't have the tools, you do the same thing manually. So we're just going to walk through the process together. But here's where I want to be interactive and ask questions and talk to each other about it. So last week we started with looking at the NIV. And it says, and this water symbolizes baptism, and now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but a pledge with good conscience for God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I said, well, that doesn't read the same as the New American Standard Bible, doesn't read the same as King James. New King James doesn't read the same as ESV. Why is it different? And so you can't look at the English to determine why it's different. You have to get behind the English. This is why it's a class on elementary Hebrew and Greek for ministry, because we want to look behind the English. And so you can see where they translate the word eperotema, they translate pledge. ESV, the New American Standard Bible, they say appeal. The King James, New King James, something else, I forget, NLT, New Living Translation, I think it is. I think. They say it's an answer to good conscience or a response to good conscience. Those are different nuances. I wasn't focusing last week so much on the answer or response, but probably want to go into that. I was looking more at wise pledge versus appeal. And so my first stop is the dictionary, the lexicon. But we didn't get to walk through that together and how we come to that. Well, we concluded, I concluded, and showed you didn't get to conclude, so I'm going to walk through and see how we can conclude that it identified a significant passage of word of interest. To me, that was interesting. We examined the context, we looked at the usage, both in English and in Greek. We compared translations. We surveyed the other uses of that word, because that word happens to be hapax legam. It's only used one time in the New Testament. So we compared that and we studied theological opinions about it. And we come to our own conclusion. And so we concluded, I did, the general usage leading up to Petron's writing supports the ask for appeal. Evidence of later pledge or promises sort of competes with this ask for appeal in various documents, other documents such as Shepherd of Homilies and Everton Gospel, which is the evidence that they used for pledge was later in that same time. The root and cognate forms from eporate, get the word eporate, all its root and cognate all formed the meaning of ask or inquire. But we could go further. We didn't. We can look at other Petrine perspectives on the topic of consciousness and baptism, salvation, other stuff. We can study other New Testament authors and compare their conclusion with other authors and with the harmony of the rest of the gospel. But the rest of this, what I wanted to do was actually not to share screen. If I can do this right. And open up my logos. So I don't really know how well this is going to work for folks on the line. I think much better than what's here in the screen is not going to be very visible. I'll talk through a little bit. So, and I'm not sure the interactivity reaction is going to be right. So what I want to do is just kind of walk through what we talked about in the slides and have some discussion. I'm reading 1 Peter 3 and turn to 1 Peter 3:21 in my Bible, and I haven't noticed, and I have to pull it up here in my Standard Bible. My default, and so I go to 1 Peter 3:21. I have my set up to look at both the New King James and New Testament at the same time. And of course, for me, corresponding to that baptism now saves you, not the rule of the earthly flesh, but it appealed to God for good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I was interested in what does this mean, an appeal to God for good conscience? What is that referring to? And certainly I can look at the King James and it says, and my screen's in the way to see it. It says, I think it's an answer to God for good conscience. Something I think I can see on the screen.
The New King James says that.
Yeah, it's an answer. And so I just want to study that, and that's where I'm starting from. And to do that, the first thing I really want to do is I'm going to just do a comparison. That's what I'm going to do, is look at multiple Bibles. And so I'm going to go to I wanted to show you that I normally go to set things up in my logos comes with very default system setups. We can look at a word study, Greek word study, or Hebrew word study. We're a good starting point. I have set up, for example, I will normally take all my Greek grammar and I'll set up a structure where I have in one place all my grammar, syntax documents, all my documents are related to grammar. So I'll have up here in this top left-hand corner, causal outlines and the syntactical outlines and annotations. And here's the SPL Greek Bible. Here's the ES5 Greek Bible. I have the New Standard. And it's set on the way I set the King James at the same time. And on my right-hand side, I'll set all my grammars. On the basis of Wallace. Here's one on prepositions and theology. Greek New Testament. And so whatever you have, I just set it up. I have it all in one spot. Search the library for it. It's just convenient. And then in the bottom, I have more syntactical documents. This one deals with idioms and standard order and stuff of this nature. Short syntax in the New Testament. This is a theological introduction to Greek and Latin for students. I don't know that. Here's a book that I used for this class, Linguistic Analysis for Greek and Testament Studies, Tools and Methods of Analysis, and such and so forth. Then over here, I'll have all my lexicons, dictionaries. Here's Strong's. And so I'll just pull them up and normally sync them so I can look it up. But I'll probably do a quick comparison. What I would do is I'd go to my tools case. You would do this manually. You would do this manually by just pulling up a bunch of concordance, putting up a bunch of Bibles, or you go online as you show. I can go here and say text comparison, and I get a choice of what text I want to compare. One of my standards is the Greek New American Standard Bible, King James, with the Apocrypha, New King James, ESV, NIV, and NLT. So I got a range. Okay? So we'll open this up in the full window, and I can see the first page of the ones. 321, 321. You guys don't mind seeing this, I guess. I don't know how much it's showing. This is sort of a test for me. I tried it earlier. It seemed to be okay. Anybody don't mind? Yeah. So here's my Greek, and so I can see the Greek is, there's eperotema, that's the word of interest. On, so the word toward God. And it's in the Mercy Reveal. Here's the King James, there's answer with good conscience, and the New King James, the same thing, answer with good conscience. ESV is an appeal to good conscience. The NIV is where you're pledge. The NLT is also response to good conscience. So, the New Living Translation, the New King James, the King James all have the nuance of an answer and response to good conscience. The ESV and the New American Standard Bible all have an appeal to God for good conscience. So here we have the NIV sort of standing alone, other than some other obscure Bibles that basically for pledge, and so it still bothers me. So, well, I know that. I see the Greek word, so let me look it up in the dictionary. So I can go to close this. I can go to various dictionaries, look it up. The easier way, though, is Logos, and if you have any Bible software, allows you to do a word study. And so you can go to your guides, and in my case, and pick the Bible word study. And actually, I've already done this word study, so instead I'm actually going to hit. Let me just close all this. And we go to, I've already done this word study. Here. And I saved it, there it is. And again, I'm going to have it set up the same way. I use that grammar as a format for me to set up. And then once I'm, there we go. Once I'm done with the format, I sometimes will delete things I don't use just to simplify it. I normally don't read in this format. I'll open it up full screen and read it, and I just save it back. But here, I've got various word studies. Word school documents. Multiple word studies, and I think start with it. Hang on. So this is it, and open 40 minutes. You can see that. And so I have various dictionaries. BDAG, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, Greek English Dictionary. Now, I generally won't go to the theological dictionaries right away. I don't want to read somebody's opinion. I want to first look at someone who gives me a definition based on the context, various context use of that word's usage in different contexts. And then later on, I'll look at the theological opinion. I don't have a problem looking at it, I just don't want to start with that. That's the way I like it. I don't want to sort of add a theological bias until I've had a chance to do my own look at it. So BDAG is a great place to start. It's one of the best. So I'll open it up. And so there's eparatema, and it has so it's the nominative form, like I said, this is the nominative form with its genitive adjective to it, case and so it gives me information about other non-biblical documents. There's this is Herodotus. I think that was I had it written down in the PowerPoint. I forget now. Like an early 2nd century document. And some others. Justice, also a second century AD document. And so they conclude that it has one contextual meaning, is the content of asking the question. And they give you references and articles where they found it used in that way. For example, in this document here, Ergon number 64, they found it used as a strange question. One of the PowerPoints we had last time was a Shepherd Hermes, non-biblical document. The 11th mandate, in verse 12. Here it's used, as we looked at last week, that according to their questions. And so one contextual usage is asking or referring to a question. Another contextual usage is more formal request, an appeal. And he uses the only example of 1 Peter 3:21. But he gives other articles. For example, that it says, in comparison, though, it's used by some as a pledge. Some is like he gives references to those who refer to it as a pledge. And so what I like about these kind of dictionaries, they just give me the facts. They don't give me a theological bias. Generally, there is some in that, but not much. So they give me the facts, and what I can do is if I want to know, is I can go to some of these articles myself and look and read and understand. I'm going to do that in a minute. We looked last week, so let me close this back up. So you can look at all the different lexicons, go through them all. We run out of time, so like Strong's, for example, we looked on the PowerPoint with Strong's last week, and Strong's is a lot more user-friendly, but it's not typically user-friendly is not going to be used. So here's Strong's number 1906, eporeto, and it gives you a transliteration. So and gives you a pronunciation, eporeto, and it's from the Strong number 1905, referring to the root of eparato, and it refers to an inquiry. Answer. That's where some get an answer or a response. So now I know where to get that. So I would suggest you look at as many of the theological dictionaries, lexicons as you can, and get a range of perspectives. And so we don't have time to go through them all now, but that's one thing. The other thing is I want to look now, where is it used? Is it used a lot of places or just a few places? So one of the things that the software does for you is, now I'm in the wrong word today, this is one of the roots, I haven't got it. Oh, no, I haven't. So you can look at all, whatever lexicons are in your system, or whatever lexicon you have on your shelf. You just sort of gather the range of perspectives. Look at the translation. In this case, pretty simple. It's appeal. According to the New American Standard Bible. If I change to another, it's going to say, Rapid cannot appeal, but they'll show translation being pledge, or promise, or response. So what all this does is tell me how the Bible is translated, based on, but with another thing you want to do is look at the root. The root word is actually from the verb erotao, and you can see, I can see the mind. Okay. It actually exists, is used, that root is 129 times, 63 under the verb erotao. So I can look at how it's used in other cognates or other forms of heterote. I can look at other forms of how it's used. And when you go through each one of those, you go through all 129 of them, you'll see that in all to ask, to put a question to examine, to investigate, unfathomably and unsearchable, find by inquiry, to make careful inquiry, to appeal. So they're all related to a question response to a question or an appeal or an inquiry. You can go further and go down and look at all the usage. Now, in this case, we're going to look at New Testament only has one usage. Already saw 1 Peter 3:21. If there were multiple usages, I would look at all of them and put them in groups or categories of what sense to use. I mean, word study is work. It's not something you just, haphazardly do. Go back to where it was. But you see, it also shows that the apostolic fathers by using. In this case, it's the shepherd of Hermes. And basically, I would look at the shepherd of Hermes, and it pulls it up for me. Well, actually, I had to pull it separately because I don't. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so we pull it up so you see it. I'm getting the spin depth. Okay, so okay, so here it is all in Greek. There's no English translation because it's not in the Bible. So unless you're a Greek scholar, and I'm not, I know some of these, but I don't know. So what I do is I go find Shepherd Hermes in English. Find it easy on the internet. And I'll find this passage. And I'll look at the English translation to it. And what it says is what we already read is it's asking a question. And so that Shepherd Hermes, when you look at the date of Shepherd Hermes, it's in the 2nd century. Or late 1st century or early 2nd century. So those kind of things. The other usage was one that we talked about. It's called the ergon. Okay, here it is. I do want to get to the theological stuff in a minute. The New Testament Apocrypha. Well, that has to be the Gospel of Ergon, which we looked at. There is also a 2nd century document. That's important. It's a 2nd century document. And there's the Greek. I'm not a Greek expert. I understand some of it, but to be sure, I went to and found this on the internet in English. If you can't find it in English, I can cut basic words into a translation dictionary and figure out line by line. But it says the same thing. It's about asking a question. So I have these late 1st century, early 2nd century, late 2nd century documents that refer to a question or inquiry. Now let's move to theological dictionary stuff. And let me go to my word study again. And one of my favorite is E, D, and T, the Exegetical Dictionary of the New Testament. It's concise, it's readable, and what it really does is provide good background information. We talked about one of the historical stuff. So it gives historical information about the word, not so much the environment. I think it's so here it is at put up. I want to point out a couple things. This is the article I gave you. Okay, regardless, let's move on. That's a New Testament, Apostolic Domingue, 1 Peter. This is where I want to use my tools. Things because I'm in this environment. I'll get my highlighter out. Eporetema is here's 1 Peter 3:21. I use other references for it. There's the theological history of the New Testament reference for it. So other articles and referenced about it. So it's just sort of a summary theological studies article. Those are sources. So New Testament Apostle Domingue, 1 Peter 3:21, most often interpreted in this context as an appeal to God for clear conscience. And references who does it, BDAG, some others do that. Here and going along with this. Bauer, that's another reference to the same thing. This interpretation is given because the word cannot have a classical meaning question, which he refers to the Shepherd Hermes classical meaning question. Since this common interpretation is not tested, in other words, there's no examples or witnesses for it, but is deduced from the context contrary to the use of the compound. One should think rather of vow or pledge versus in these articles for that. The word is attested in the 2nd century AD as a question concerning a treaty. And so they point back to as a vow or treaty or pledge to a 2nd century reference. That's where I have a problem. They can't point to any 1st century references or earlier references. All earlier references are appeal or question alike. Later references, and that was in the article I gave you. This is not the article. In the article I gave you, it talks specifically about the later reference. He was a 2nd century later reference of a treaty, and this is one of the reference. This Mouton Milligan, this is the article here. 2nd century AD and they talk about how it forms the Latinism in the letter of Rome near the end of the 1st century, taken similarly as the Latinism is stipulatio, a promise or an obligation established by an official interrogation. It's ancient Roman legal practice as part of a legal obligation. We talk about later 1st century reference in the Latin document. Well, we're not dealing with Latin, and Paul wasn't dealing with that, or Peter wasn't. So the narrow meaning treaty is not to be taken too strictly so much as the comprehensive legal practice of the stipulato, the Latin, began to degenerate into a more treaty, into a mere treaty in the 1st century. In so much as the context of 1 Peter suggests that baptisma in Mark 10:38 refers to suffering and persecution. The interpretation of the suffering and persecution is an obligation of a promise before God. And so you look at it and you look at the other article, I'm out of time. The article I gave you, it refers back to these later documents for this pledge and how it came to mean that. And so I put greater weight on the earlier references than the later references. And that's why I feel like the strongest conclusion, and that's why you see the word-for-word translations in the American Standard Bible, the King James Bible, the New King James Bible, and the ESV all lead towards as the question or appeal perspective. Whereas the NIV and a few other more, I won't say liberal, but more freer in the translation, use the later references of pledge, and I just don't feel that's appropriate in the context. You can do more. You can look at, for example, they're speaking about baptism is a clear conscience. It's an appeal to God for clear conscience. Or is it a pledge to God for clear conscience? If you look at how Peter uses conscience, and there are 2 other places in Peter he uses conscience, it's all in the sense of a question and not a pledge. So Peter's usage elsewhere supports the idea of a question of appeal. You go further and look at the other contextual information about baptism, salvation, these kind of things. See how Peter used that. I like to stay within the author, because just because another author uses it differently doesn't mean Peter does. However, you can look beyond and just see how all the other authors do. Do they agree with Peter or they disagree with Peter? And so that's how I would conduct the study, using these kind of tools. You can do it manually with the library, but software tools make it so much easier. It gives you more depth. I'm meant to be a discussion, but honestly, I'm the only discussion. So, any thoughts or questions? And we'll close with Kurt. Online, anything for anybody? Okay, well, let's thank you for tonight, and next week we're going to continue to look at some exegetical principles and work studies. We'll continue to look at how David Allen Black suggested work studies done. When we're done with him, we'll look at someone else, and then we'll look at some other fallacies in work studies that D.A. Carson brings out. These kind of things. So let's go with that prayer as we close. And thank you for being here tonight. Father in heaven, our Creator, we're grateful for this night you've given us, and we're grateful for your Son, for the opportunity to serve you. Pray that we do in a manner that's worthy of the sacrifice. Father, we're mindful of many of our members of struggle in this life, especially we lift up before you our brother David Smith, and the struggle that he and his family are going through for years. Bless him. Yeah. Pray, Father, be your will, he will do it. Father, we pray that that's not your will, that you not have to suffer. And we can be an encouragement and strength for him and his family in many ways necessary. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.